Koutou. Kia koutou e ngā rangatira o te mahi ako mō nai tātou te we Māori, ka nui timi aroha kia koutou. Ko ai au, he uri o tahu pōtiki, ko Kāti Huarapa me Kāti Hāteatea ka hapu, ko Sacha McMeeking tōku ingoa, nā reira tēnā roa koutou. So yeah, I'm at day 8 and I had no idea that coming back to academia was so exhausting that I'd spend the last 2 days flatlined in bed with the flu. This is the first time I've left my house in 3 days. It's quite exciting. The only thing that's not so great about it is that there's lots of beautiful people here that I want to hug and kiss and I can't. E hoa ma, all those beautiful faces that I'm kissing from a distance, ka mihi. So it's true that I want to talk about the role of intergenerational continuity, but first I need to make a confession, because this is really about the changing world and how the inheritors of change and transformation get to pick up our role in changing the world. And I worked out the other day that when I was going through my first set of exam anxiety, you know, when you get into that student period of September and you just want to quit university because it's all just overwhelming and you're tired, my first round of September student blues is when the third reading of the Ngāi Tahu Claims Settlement Act went through the House. So at the same time that I thought that I was coming in to do great things as a law student and fight for justice, my people had already changed the world. And yeah, it took me about 15 years to work that out. So my core argument is that I'm an inheritor of the great deeds of many visionaries, of great taniwha who have done amazing things, and that the role of my generation is to work out how we can continue what they've already done, but in a very different world. So if you'll bear with my, can you hear me through all of this? Aroha mai. Want to talk through the 20th century and the objectives, the strategies, the tactics, and most importantly the impact that our visionaries and great taniwha achieved. So in the 20th century, I reckon that our great taniwha were focused on 3 leading objectives. That they were focused on recognition, on revitalisation and validation. And that these objectives were necessary as the product of that colonial legacy we love to hate and talk about a lot. So in terms of recognition, excuse me, I'm just going to get water. And if anybody has any great anti-flu drugs, I'd really like to talk to you after. So recognition. So the first step in the 20th century was about rights recognition. Naturally, I'd say that because I'm a lawyer. Well, sort of, not particularly real lawyer, but sort of a lawyer. And so anyone who's done even a little bit of law will know that in 1877 there was a famous case known as Wu Parata. And that's where all of the great hara about the law came from. Because Wu Parata, as all of you will know, is where that fabulous judge said that the treaty was a nullity. That in terms of the legal effect of the treaty, it was nothing. That it was merely a matter of honour that our great benevolent politicians could disregard at will. And of course they did. So in the 20th century, one of the great fights that we had was about rights recognition. We needed to have the legitimacy of our rights as a people, our existence as a people recognised. And we had, and I'll talk about some of the tactics that we used to achieve that. And that game's not quite over, but remarkable achievements were made. The second objective we had in the 20th century was about revitalisation. And we've had many people here today who led that and are still fighting for it. The revitalisation of a reo me ona tikanga, because we know the legacy of the assimilationist agenda, which stripped us of many of the things that make us us, but certainly not our heart. So in the 20th century, just enormous efforts going into the movements that revitalised our language and culture and our strength and our kaha. And I'd say that the third objective in the 20th century was about validation, about validating our ways of knowing and being as a people. And we needed that as well. So what were the strategies that our people used for those three objectives? Well, you could go to many presentations in the 20th century. I made a few because I'm sure it wasn't totally 15 years that I've been doing this stuff. And if anyone said ka whawhai tonu mātou at the end of a presentation, it was almost a guaranteed standing ovation. Yeah, right. And that's because during the 20th century, as we know, it was a time of profound change. It was a hostile environment. And it was necessary to fight, to have our rights recognised, to revitalise our culture and identity, what makes us us, and to validate the legitimacy of our ways of knowing and being. It was very much, I'd say, an advocacy-driven period within Te Ao Māori's history. And quite rightfully, it needed to be an advocacy-driven period to generate the type of change that we've inherited. The tactics that we used in an era of advocacy, there were quite a few because we're quite clever. So we know many of them. 20th century, late 20th century, one of the key things that we know and celebrate is tipping the change in our world was the role of the protest movement. From the land march to the occupations, Takaparawha, Pākua Tori, we occupied, we stood, we marched. And that advocacy was fundamental in transforming the political climate in which we could advocate for change. The second that we used so successfully was strategic litigation. We had the most amazing people leading very clever litigation to challenge the impact of that Parata decision, and they got as far as they possibly could. So during the 1980s, following on from the protest movement, we had this series of judicial decisions which opened up not a cure for the flu, but that legitimated our claims to different types of natural resources. We had the Waitangi Tribunal jurisprudence that started to come through that reframed the nature of the treaty partnership. We had a fundamental restructuring of the legal arrangements between Crown and Māori. We were very clever in using political processes, whether that was about the settlement negotiations starting in the late 80s to various royal commissions where we had many of our most amazing leaders represented in those royal commission processes. We used petitions. We were adept political masters. I think one thing that we can celebrate the most is that we knew how to use all of those strategies all at once, particularly if you're a tātepini and you've got a really creative approach to the law anyway. The academy was also fundamental during this period. So while we had phenomenal advocacy going on in the courts and the political environment, the academy was right there. Many of the people that were leading these processes formed themselves as a tight crew through university connections. The Māori Students Association was travelling with Marta Anuku Mahuika recently, who found all of the minutes to the Māori Students Association after his father passed. It seems that a lot of the hui happened at pubs, but Uncle Api still took very good notes. And they actively conspired with the greatest intent to pull off all of these things and used their roles in the academy to be a strategic augment to what they were doing, to be an opportunity to come together, and most importantly, to validate the knowledge that went behind their aspirations. So what happens? So what happens if you have great leaders who have a fearless ambition to change the world, and strategically deploy a whole bunch of tactics, from protests to political machinations to strategic litigation, and a really important role of people who are smart and careful with their writing, change the world. So by the end of the 20th century, we'd achieved grand normative change. So we'd moved from an era where Māori were the problem child, maybe we're still a problem child, but in a different and more exciting way. I quite like being a problem child anyway. So we'd achieved grand normative change. The parameters of our constitutional arrangement were in a state of change. We'd had, as I understand, Matua Smith talked about this morning, we'd had movements that had built prototypes that had been created with no templates, like the kohanga reo. So we had made our own future actively. We'd changed the nature of the relationship with the Crown. We'd started building things in our own image to serve our own aspirations, because our people had fought for the space to do so. And we're slowly retraining the machinery of the Crown. So by the end of the 20th century, the world had changed significantly. We genuinely had got to a profound change point, where arguably at the end of the 20th century, we had the strongest leadership that we've had in generations nationwide. We've got more, but not fabulously conducive government policies. We've got more, but not enough recognition of Māori values and perspectives. We've got a growing workforce of our people who can walk in both worlds. And we've got extended relationships. So we've got a most remarkable environment to do things. So if we do get to this change point, what I want to ask is, what's the role of this generation? And what stays the same and what changes? So I think the first is that we move to looking at different questions. So in the 20th century, it was really common for things to have a singular focus. If it was the fisheries settlement, the singular focus was to get fisheries entitlements which enabled us to return to the business and activity of fishing. Whereas in the 21st century, the comparable question is fresh water. So the question isn't how can iwi Māori have an allocation of fresh water, because that's far too simple for a 21st century world. In order to be able to answer what's iwi Māori entitlements and responsibilities to fresh water, we have to engage with a congested landscape of everybody else that has rights and interests in fresh water as well. So when it comes to those singular things, with a few notable exceptions, like the hell that was foreshore and seabed, most of the issues that we're dealing with now are not going to be singular Māori issues. They're about Māori rights, entitlements, aspirations and objectives within contexts that have many more players than previously. Equally, we've moved into the post-settlement phase, whereas I'm sure Arihia talked about this morning, this is what she wakes up thinking about every day, this complex landscape of interdependent questions for which no one has any answers because we're making it up as we go. What does it mean to be an intergenerational investor whose responsibility is to grow an asset base that should contribute to sustaining the aspirations of 50,000 tribal members as of today, who will continue to grow because we quite like breeding. And then there's the whole CPI dynamics. Then there are the questions of what does it mean to have cultural authenticity in a business context? How do we move between having intense fiduciary obligations, because the first obligation on any tribal governor is to not stuff it up. How do we move from that into being aspirational and visionary about the type of world that we are obligated to create? So, first point, the nature and complexity of the questions that we have to answer have changed. And I think that means that we're moving into a next set of objectives, and I think that these are always going to continue to evolve. So as of today, what I think is that we're moving from a phase where it's not just about rights recognition anymore. I think we've won the normative argument that our rights exist. The next part of that objective is how do we express those rights? So how do we move from, yes, there is something in the way of a right that iwi Māori have to fresh water. The next part of the puzzle is how do we express that in an authentic, meaningful way that doesn't suffocate the soul of who we are and what we aspire to within a congested landscape. When it comes to the second objective of revitalisation, we have amazing achievements already. We need more, absolutely, but I think we're moving from a focus on just revitalisation to growth. And when it comes to validation, we need to do more of the reclamation of our stories and our knowledge. But increasingly, I think that it's about how we apply that knowledge to unforeseen, unforeseeable, and really fabulously tricky puzzles. So I think we've moved from an era where our strategy is ka whawhai tonu mātou to an era where our strategy is hei kai kaku ringaringa. I think that this is the dawn of the next phase of tino rangatiratanga, that we're limited only by our imagination and most importantly by our creativity. If we have the ability to aspire, to solve, to create, I think we have the opportunity to unleash it. And this is a little bit crass, but it comes from Tā Tipene, so that makes it okay to say in public, because he will have said it in public. So one of his lines is, we spent so long being the dog that pissed on the wheel of the bus, that now that we get to drive it, we want to go back to pissing on the wheel. I take no responsibility for that, but it does kind of embody this, that if we're in this era where we can make and create whatever we can dream to be, we have to jump into the driver's seat. And the only barrier to that driver's seat is ourselves and the extent of our aspiration, because we've inherited a world where people have already kicked open the door for us. Space has been created for us. Yes, we need to advocate, because these aren't clean, clinical separations of era. There's bleed between them. But if we've inherited all of this space, it's up to us to do something with it. So what do I think we should do with it? So I think the strategies and the tactics of today are about, I really like this word because I struggle to say it, interdisciplinarianism, so which is pretty much not being bounded. And this is where the theory of remixes comes in. So I think that we have always been fiercely acquisitorial as a people. Whether it was about trade or technology, we are intensely opportunistic. It has served us well. And I think that what it is for today is about remixing things that come mairango and from across the globe to serve our own purposes and in our own image. I think that the tools of today are about collaboration. It wasn't that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, I heard one of our chiefs talking about how our political influence strategy should be to be like Cuba. We would just do an isolationist approach. That might have worked then, but I don't think it works now. I think that if we're going to pull anything off, just like everything that we do at the PA, we need a team. And I think this is where it might get a little bit dangerous and I might be out of my creative safe space. I think also if we only dance with people who look like us, we don't change the world at all. I think we need to have a crack at dancing with the devil, you know, as long as we can tame them to our own song. We need to be weaving a future that is about taking the technologies like our old people did from different parts of the world, about bringing new people that we haven't met before to our table to sing to our song. And remembering that while we do that, we're making things up without a template, in the same way that the kohanga reo movement was made without a template and is now globally renowned, which is beautiful, but more importantly is ensuring that we're bringing through now the first generation of kohanga and kura graduates who are going to take up this next mantle of creating our future in our own image. So if I was going to offer any concluding remarks, I think that there are a few things that our generation should be thinking about to maintain continuity of vision and purpose with the people who came before. I think the first is, when it comes to our leaders, it was quite helpful having that abstract read out to me because I'd forgotten what I said. But now that I know what I'm supposed to be talking about, so we had the era of the Tatipanis and the Uncle Apis, where they were and are charismatic leaders who we could all get behind. And I think in that era of advocacy, we needed the singular charismatic leader to follow. Without them, we would not have achieved the change that we are so fortunate and humbled to experience now. But in this time where we have these complex problems that are interdependent, that need interdisciplinary solutions, I think that we're looking for a different type of leadership. I think that in this era we need networked collaborative leadership, aka a brat pack. That's a term borrowed from Eru. And that networked collaborative leaders need to bring different skills to a common vision. And I think that's quite a hard thing to learn, because effectively we're looking to choreograph intergenerational leadership from multiple different seats to achieve a common purpose. I think it's hard, it's going to be something that we're going to need to learn, but it's really exciting. It probably means we need to have a few more parties so we can plot and scheme casually before we get into the formal part of it. I think equally we need new knowledge. So when it comes to lots of the puzzles that every iwi is now going to experience, what is it to be authentic in growing our own commerce? There are no answers to that. And I think one of the most important things for the Academy is to recognise there will be different times when the community and iwi are leading and different times when the Academy is leading. I think there are some complex problems that only the Academy can lead because of the nature of the question. But when it comes to solving some of the things that our people need solved, whether it's about the nature of business in the 21st century, whether it's about supporting social enterprise within our community so that our change agents can create the change they want to see in the world, some of those places, the role of the Academy is in the back row, to validate, to nurture, to support, to accelerate. And so I think when it comes to generating those new bodies of knowledge, we've got to recognise that there are already leaders in our communities that are making it up. They are making up new knowledge every day as they solve real problems. And maybe our job is to celebrate them as much as it is in other areas to lead. Nā reira, tēnā rō koutou.